Okay.
We are, okay, I guess I can start. There was some lady
Yes.
on a recording. All right. Well, welcome to the Institute of Public Policy and World Affairs at Rockford University. Catherine Forsland is the head of the Department of History and International Affairs. I am the head of nothing, having served in Congress for 20 years and done various careers. We started researching, having a program on artificial intelligence about a year ago. And as we got ready to have one program after the other, this field changed so quickly that we didn't even have a working definition of what artificial insemination. Yeah, there I am back at the farm again. As to what artificial intelligence actually is. So when I had my career, when my career in Congress ended, I went to work for the Korea Economic Institute of America. And there I was in continuous contact with scholars from the various think tanks in Washington, Carnegie, Brookings, Johns Hopkins, and of course, the Heritage organization. And in preparing this particular program, I contacted a friend of mine in Heritage and I said, I need somebody who can talk about what AI is and has a background in it. So we are thrilled to have with us today Jake Denton. Jake is a fellow graduate of American University. And it took me 4 years, took him 2 years to get through. He's had a very interesting background. Jake, if you could tell us about a little bit about Heritage and a little bit about your background, and then we can get into a discussion on AI.
Certainly. Yeah, my name is Jake Denton, and thank you all for joining us. As Don mentioned, I am a researcher at the Heritage Foundation in our Tech Policy Center. The Heritage Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., where we conduct scholarly policy research. We are funded entirely by our members, tens of thousands of Americans across the country. And it allows for us to do nonpartisan, non-industry tainted scholarship, things that are really just the truth. And so at the heart of this for our center at the moment is really artificial intelligence. It's something that has really captivated Washington. So it's great to be with you all today talking about this. A little bit about my background. I previously was working at a consultancy, a boutique firm here in Washington focused on digital strategy. I led our digital strategy team, working with political candidates, political organizations, and private corporations, really focusing on these platforms, these tools, whether it be the advertising markets, and digital kind of surveillance technology, really, or artificial intelligence and how to integrate these things into your business, into your organization. I was on the operator side, and I was lucky enough to work with Heritage a great deal. And as this tech policy area began to really accelerate, I saw a great opportunity to move over from the for-profit business side and really get into scholarship and kind of fulfill that patriotic duty and actually, try and hope to make the world a little bit of a better place. But yeah, Don, I'm happy to dive in, or how do you want to go from here?
Well, why don't you give us a good working definition of artificial intelligence, even though as you speak, the field continues to grow.
Certainly, yeah, I can. I'll give the definition, and I'll kind of just dive into my remarks right after that, and we can go from there. Artificial intelligence is, it feels very new, but it is the product of decades of research, right? So we wouldn't be here today with ChatGPT and these other really exciting tools if it weren't for the legwork of decades of a little less interesting, research, the real technical stuff. But at its core, artificial intelligence is a branch of computer science that focuses on creating intelligent machines that can perform tasks that would typically require human intelligence. So whether that's something like visual perception, the ability to put an image in front of you and perceive what is actually there, whether it be speech recognition, decision making, increasingly image generation and video generation as well. Artificial intelligence is a very broad topic, and I think herein lies really the problem, right? I mean, that definition is about as close as we can get to consensus of what this technology is, and it doesn't really do a lot to illustrate really the problems we're dealing with. Each one of those subsets, these byproducts of intelligence, bring about a different set of problems. And the average policymaker, the average staffer in Washington, knows just about as much as you do after hearing this definition, right? I mean, most of them have no experience working with this technology or really in the research field. And so they rely very heavily on outside groups and increasingly outside groups that are funded by industry, those with a stake in this game, this question of how do we regulate the technology? And so the topic of this conversation today was the good, the bad, and the ugly of artificial intelligence. And, starting with the good, I think the overarching theme of this is progress, right? I mean, we are advancing at a very rapid state, and it reflects well in our ability to adapt and grow as a country. This is bringing about a lot of very interesting issues that we've been able to prevail through, whether it be labor, the ability to find these qualified individuals who with a technical background that can actually push this thing into the future, whether it be the energy demand. These things take up more energy than we really know how to generate for it, yet we continue to progress. You just go down the line of issues, and in all honesty, it is very shocking for me to see that we've so far passed the stress test. We're in the very early stages, but all signs in theory would have pointed to us having some type of hiccup already. So I think that really is the good. We're moving forward. We're moving into the future. When you consider the bad and where this could go wrong, it really, I think, stems around market power. The ability to create a foundational model, which is the engine that really runs AI as we know it, as defined in that definition I started with. It is the extensive data sets and the really computational magic that folks in these AI labs have strung together over the course of decades. That takes a lot of work, first and foremost, and it takes a lot of money. OpenAI is spending billions and billions of dollars just to give you ChatGPT. There are all sorts of new innovative projects that are looking all around the world for funding, and they simply can't find it. They're very exciting projects, things that would objectively advance the market, but they cost a great deal. The average startup in this space is, really commanding upwards of $1 billion to get their feet under them. And that is a logistical challenge in which these large big tech companies, those behind Facebook, Google, the real titans of the space have a huge advantage. And what is happening, what we're living through right now, is a consolidation of this space at its earliest stage. So your legacy players are really acquiring a great deal of market share here, and they don't have good intentions. They are not trying to push this technology into the future. They're not trying to bring the benefits of this to your hometown. They're really trying to consolidate the market to a point where they have a stranglehold. They're looking to build regulatory moats, things that are making it essentially impossible for a young startup to maybe challenge them in the future. And all they're really interested in is expanding their revenue streams. So when you look at this technology, I think the bad is really the potential for us to not reach our potential. I think that is my biggest fear when you look at this. I think oftentimes we talk about the sci-fi scenarios, killer robots, things like that. But reality is this is probably going to be a net positive if it is able to, see its full potential. And there are really just a handful of people standing in its way. And that really, to me, is the bad. And when you consider the ugly, it really is kind of these, hypothetical scenarios. I don't think we've necessarily seen the ugly play out in the real world. This week, there was an instance where OpenAI had released a, new voice assistant, and it was supposedly modeled around Scarlett Johansson, the actress' voice. And she was contending that this was unauthorized, and OpenAI was contending it wasn't her voice, it was just someone that sounded like her that the model was trained on. And I think this is where it starts to get ugly. The question of intellectual property, the question of who owns the data that these models are being trained on. What data should it be trained on? Are we comfortable with it being trained on biometric data that you don't necessarily consent to, whether it be through CCTV cameras or maybe that you uploaded a photo to Facebook? Is that something that you, maybe you agreed in the terms of service, or, there's an opt-out option that you're completely unaware of? Are you comfortable with that? And I think that really is where this starts to get ugly, because it really challenges our identity, as a person. Do we have a right to our face, our voice? What is our pathway to reconcile misuse of this, right? If OpenAI or someone clones you, whether it be your likeness, your voice, any of these things, your innermost thoughts, who do you challenge this, right? I mean, there isn't really a legal environment where they're standing here. This is all new territory. The courts have struggled with Web 1.0 concepts. I'm not too confident in their ability to handle the AI era. And then when you look at, our legislative branch, it is essentially grinded to a halt across the board. And they're trying to simultaneously tackle this brand new topic, one that they really did not even begin to think about until just about a year ago. And what does that look like in practice when a legislative branch that is increasingly partisan, divided by personal squabbles, is tasked with regulating probably the most foreign technology they've ever come across? But not just a foreign technology, one that could truly transform our country. And really, every single one of us has something at stake in this, whether it be, the ugly scenario that we discussed about your likeness, whether it be maybe eating away at your profession. Maybe you're an artist, maybe you're an accountant. It's encroaching in those spaces, obviously. What are our regulators going to do about that? It isn't really too clear. And I think this is where, things start to get interesting, because, as I talked about at the beginning, the Heritage Foundation, we do nonpartisan scholarship. The Tech Policy Center in particular is really uniquely nonpartisan. What is the partisan divide over artificial intelligence? It's almost impossible to say, but you can kind of feel your objections to different proposals. The European Union put forward its AI Act. It passed into law, and it will be binding over the entire union here in short order. And you read through this thing, it's an absolute monstrosity. It's one of the longest, most complicated documents I've ever tried to navigate. And you can feel from the moment you open that thing that it's wrong, right? I mean, we're at the earliest stages of this technology, where Europe has essentially had a decimated tech sector. They don't have a single, continental champion even, let alone national champion, that you can really point to that rivals American business. And they had all these promising young AI startups that are now crushed under the AI Act. And you look at France in particular, has a company called Mistral, truly one of the shining unicorns in this space. There's already rumors circulating that they're going to leave Europe under this act, and that is loss for Europe. And I look at the United States here, and we have some level of arrogance. Being American, we think that everyone is just going to stay here because, it's the best place to run a business. It's not actually clear that moving into the future here, looking at the proposals in Washington, that's going to be the case. You look to the Gulf, these Arab states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, are pumping tens of billions of dollars into venture funds, free money to these AI companies to move them to their shores. They're giving them energy subsidies. They're waiving immigration processes. We are sitting on our hands while the rest of the world is mobilizing, and we're pondering very silly questions, very silly regulatory questions. In California, there's a bill, SB 1047, that just passed the California State Senate, that imposes a very stringent technical standard, 10 to the 47 flops, I believe is the threshold, which to you probably sounds like something completely obscure and meaningless, but it's a computational power threshold. That how strong can these systems be? And, that metric is one that you would probably assume, is really high up there. It's one that is hard to achieve. That's true. OpenAI, ChatGPT, it's pretty much the only company that is at that threshold. But, in the nitty-gritty details where these bills live and die, there's a little provision there that kind of snuck up on all of us. that says of a similar performance, right? So if you have that technical threshold, if you're of the computational power of OpenAI, you're regulated. Or if you just happen to rival the performance of the machine, who determines that, right? Are we going off of benchmarks? What are they? Not clear. What happens to a company if you fail to comply with that? Well, under this bill, you go to jail. This is a felony charge for failing to comply, and it creates a whole nother branch of bureaucracy within California, the Frontier Model Division, which has a very ominous, scary name, and it's essentially just a bunch of bureaucrats with no technical background that are going to be policing a very technical industry. And to me, this is almost the beginning of the end. You look around the country, there's 400 bills being proposed in each state. All of them are a minefield. There's something unique that could destabilize the standing of one of these startups. And to me, this is just the writing on the wall that we're going to live in a world where these 2 or 3 big tech firms are the only ones who can foot the compliance bill. And all these small, promising companies will never see the light of day. They'll be bought up, or they'll move to the Gulf, or just decide not to even embark on this journey. And so I think that really is, where I'll leave it, and where we can jump into questions is, the question I'm posing to lawmakers is, how do you balance the good and the bad? How do you bring about this innovation while also protecting your constituents? What are you really protecting them from? Because it actually isn't all that clear in many cases. We're not living in the Matrix. This isn't, the Terminator. These are very practical business-to-business tools in most cases that we're essentially trying to claw away from the market. And so I think that's where I'll leave things. We can get into questions, and happy to really talk on any of this.
Let me ask you a technical question. How does AI mimic a person's voice? What's the mechanics of that?
Yeah, so it's very complicated. It's increasingly less burdensome for the company. So for a long time there, it's all about training data, input data, and essentially the back end, what we refer to as a black box. It has all of these layers of algorithms. It's kind of where the magic happens. We're not able to peer inside of it. These are structured in many cases as neural networks. They model the system of the brain. And the same way that we're still trying to discover the brain, many of us really don't understand, even inside of these companies, how these models are doing what they do. There's so much information in there that they're kind of, they're magic in many ways. And what happens is you put in this input of essentially a recording of you maybe potentially on this call, and it goes into this black box, it goes into the neural network, and it produces a replica. What goes on in there, what actually enables it to pull it out is magic. It's a series of algorithms, really. It's math at the end of the day, and it gives you an output. And I think really where the interesting side of this happens is the ability to shape that output, right? The fine tuning and the alteration that occurs after the replication. That is really where things get interesting. There's a great deal of variation in the tools, which ones are able to actually enable that, and which ones can do pre-canned, pre-recorded type of text reverbs. So I hope that kind of answers it. It's not an easy one to answer. To a degree, most even inside these companies don't fully understand what the process is.
To do that, do they need an original recording of somebody's voice?
So it depends on what you mean by original. Microsoft actually has a model, that I believe it's only 3 seconds of audio for a perfect replication. So that could be me just recording you make a side remark ordering your coffee, right? It's I'll take a large black coffee, and that's all they need. So that's kind of what I was trying to get at the beginning there, is the burden, the data input has been reduced to a very small scale, to where you just need a small sample to recreate the voice.
Artificial. Go ahead, Catherine.
No, I just said thanks.
At one time, I believe a definition of AI was the gathering of all existing facts. and finding a way to speed up the assimilation of them. But what you're saying now, it's not just that, but it's actually creating a person's voice. The recent case of what happened in New Hampshire, where somebody was able to mimic President Biden's voice, go on robocalls and tell people that you really shouldn't vote in the primary. It's a waste of time. Spend your time in the general election. Well, that person was apprehended and I think pled guilty to something. I don't know what's going to happen to him. But that leads us to the impact of AI on elections themselves and on computing the electoral or the election results. Could you help us on that?
Yes, yeah. So to start at the beginning of that question, you noted the evolution, right? So it started as maybe a sorting tool, a data analysis tool, and today we're living in this space where it feels as though it's creating, right? It has some degree of a personality. It can kind of generate you interesting content, and the reason that is this is intelligence, right? And I think that's a thing that most of us haven't come to grapple with yet when it comes to this topic. These models, whether it be ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude, it's a competing model, actually have IQs, right? You can make these things take IQ tests, and they scale. Each update, the IQ increases a little bit. And with that, the same way if your intelligence increases as you grow up and your brain really kicks into full gear, your abilities improve. And so currently, for context, ChatGPT clocks in at around an 80 IQ. And you look at the massive leaps it's made. That is by no means even close to the ceiling for its IQ. Within the next 2 to 3 years, it is not out of the question that it has an IQ of something in the 200s. When you look at Claude, a competing model, which has recently released an update, so it's slightly ahead of ChatGPT, but ChatGPT's most recent update is scheduled for sometime this summer. Claude is at around 103 IQ. So a separation of about 20 points there makes all the difference. You use Claude and it feels like you're truly living in the future. You go back to ChatGPT and you almost give yourself a headache. And that's just 20 IQ points. Over the course of the next 2 years, these things will improve on an exponential curve to the point where it's in the hundreds. So when you consider the electoral context, it's particularly interesting because right now what it is capable of is not necessarily what it will be capable of in 2028. So, or really even by election day, at the pace at which we're moving. The tools available now that often get the most attention are these synthetic media tools, whether it be image generators. There's some video products that are coming out allowing you to generate video or audio. These are the ones that really are captivating the public's attention in the electoral context. Rightfully so. I can make, let's say you were running for election, I can make you do a radio interview that's all fake where you say something crazy and I really character assassinate you, and maybe it hurts your chances of winning the race. But where I think the most interesting electoral work is going on is in the text-based stuff. So audience segmentation within electoral politics is really where the magic happens. The ability to know regional political differences, whether on the presidential level, you're talking the difference between what Minnesotans respond to versus people in Ohio. Those are two different messages. But what AI allows for you to do at an amazing scale is even inside of a singular state, you can nail down to a particular neighborhood, a message, an idea, a policy point that will stick there and communicate it directly to them with 100% accuracy, exactly what they need to hear for that regional issue. And for me, it sucks the personality out of this. It becomes a science, reaching the right audiences and manipulating them with the perfect message, even though the candidate themselves has never actually thought about this or that issue. The website doesn't list this as a policy priority. It becomes all fake, right? I think that is the overarching theme of this is it takes away the actual leadership side of this, where you're supposed to be representative of your constituency, and it just turns this into like a science. And to me, it's very gross. You're here in DC, and you already feel like it lacks that personality and the connection to the people. And this is just one degree further away from to that type of model.
I understand that even prior to AI, with all of the information, personal information that's been captured by banks and others, that you can tell whether or not a person is more likely a Democrat or Republican based upon such things as the magazines that he or she will read, the brand of gasoline, purchases at grocery stores. Every purchase that we make is recorded. It has that SKU code that's on the bottom of it, and I find it pretty daunting to be able to tell whether a person is Republican or Democrat, including the type of beer that he or she drinks or doesn't drink. So
Yeah.
AI builds upon that. Is that correct?
So, I think, starting at the beginning of this, often that's referred to as your digital footprint, right? It's these essentially data drops along the internet that allow for a third party, whether it be a search provider, a data broker, someone in this lane of data collection, that industry, to pick it up and apply it to a folder, and they sell this on the market. What I've often referred to it as, though, is a data blood trail. It's not as delicate as a footprint anymore. You're spewing data everywhere you go. They're not just tracking your purchasing of beer, they're tracking how long you looked at the beer can on the website. Or they're not just tracking the fact that you bought a particular type of gas, they're tracking which gas station you went to, how long you stayed there, inferring whether or not you purchased the beer there or merely were filling up your gas to go purchase it at another location. They're estimating how long it takes for you to drive in between those two locations. Literally anything possible to collect, they're collecting, and even things you think that are worthless data drops, they're pulling. And so truly everything is being collected on you. And you make this note about politics, and I think it's right. It's very easy actually to guess Republican or Democrat. Having worked in the political operative space for a great deal of time, you can log on to any of these different tools and it will tell you 70% Republican voter. These are the top 3 issues. No one filled out a survey. These are data buys, right? So these are things that the teams that I would run, they're walking up and knocking on your door, knowing exactly your preferences when it comes to electoral politics, and that freaks a lot of people out. But really, to me, that's not even the most nefarious side of this. It knows if you're pregnant, oftentimes before you're pregnant, based off of your search history. Cellular providers can actually determine, who you're married to, right? So they know the 2 devices in a single household, given your footprint. And it is so precise that if your spouse is sleeping in the bed and you're sleeping on the couch, they have reasonable suspicion that you're going through marriage troubles. And it will actually, it's a purchasable insight that a marketer could sell on the open market to recommend you marriage counseling or maybe a divorce attorney. These are like really appalling things that we've allowed for the tech industry to get away with. And AI is an accelerant, right? They're not doing the collection. They're taking vast troves of seemingly unrelated pieces of data and casting a wide net, capturing relationships between maybe political party affiliation and your marital status to maybe the news cycle, right? Like all of these different things suddenly have a link. And that's where AI, to me, in this data sense, becomes a much trickier issue. Because it truly is a weapon, but depending on who's using it, this can be used for good, it could also be used for a great deal of bad. So it's very use case dependent, and particularly who's using it in that use case.
Your former boss in Congress, Kathy Morris Rogers, who's the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, introduced legislation, I believe, yesterday, requiring people who collected data on an individual to reveal the nature of the data. Did I say that correctly in the bill that she's proposing?
It's a very expansive bill. It does a lot of things. It's about 170 pages. And so that is one side of things. There's essentially a disclosure. I think the most interesting piece of content from that bill within this context is the data minimization provision, which for many people is a very obscure topic. It's something that only people in computer science would really talk about, but it's actually quite simple, right? Google search, for instance, has no business tracking your geolocation footprint, your microphone, or any of these things, but it does. It's excess data. It's superfluous. It really has no business or role in the underlying functions of the service, yet they're allowed to collect it and store it forever. Data minimization requires that these companies only collect the data that is absolutely necessary to the core functions of the application or the service, which we all think is like the logical thing. Why is your flashlight app monitoring your contact lists or tracking your keystrokes? You would never think that's happening, but it is. So this data minimization provision makes that law, something that we've seen in the European Union under the GDPR, which has a whole host of problems, but that is, one glimmer of hope that we might be able to, pull our privacy back away from these big tech giants. But it's a great piece of legislation. If you're kind of interested in this privacy battle, I encourage you to at least read the one pager that goes through the different provisions, because it'll give you a sense of the fact that we've never touched on any of these issues that you might kind of feel like there has to be a law for that, right? None of us would ever imagine that there's not a data privacy bill governing the United States, but that is the case. There is actually no protection over your data at all. There is no data privacy framework for Congress. That's crazy. It's 2024 and it's a free-for-all. So I encourage you to go through and look at that if you're interested, because it'll give you a good sense of where we're at in this conversation.
Give us an example of a company that would be impacted by that and the consumer.
Yes, yeah. So I think the best example is Facebook. I guess Meta as a whole now is a conglomerate, right? So you think about their suite of services. They own a commanding share in several game companies, video games, mobile games, collecting things like user behaviors, internal of those applications, microphone, GPS, these types of things. Then that device identifier, it knows that the same user playing that game is the same user associated with the Facebook account. Then you move over to Instagram and it tracks you to over there. And then you move over to WhatsApp and it tracks you there. And it merges all of these inputs into a singular bucket, and it sells that on an advertising marketplace to third-party vendors. And, in many cases, those are international entities. Sometimes this ends up with a data broker. And what we found out just this winter, it's something we all kind of knew, but reached the public, is that China, the CCP, was actually using these data brokers and these advertiser data trackers to surveil Americans, particularly veterans. So there's a study from Duke University that actually found that you could purchase the death records of veterans for around 12 cents per veteran. And how horrible is that, right? Who enables this, though? It is the big tech companies like Meta, like Google, that allow for advertisers to place these trackers. So Meta, in theory, is the central apparatus, Google to a degree as well, where this data trafficking is really occurring. And the consumers affected are literally everybody. Because there's this little nefarious tool called the software development kit that is embedded in just about every application from these massive social media companies. Facebook integrates with, let's say, this is a good example, the University of San Francisco Medical Center. It gives you that functionality on your webpage to like USF on Facebook. And then let's just say, hypothetically, Facebook takes advantage of that access and pulls patient records, and then adds that to your advertising footprint and knows exactly who to advertise it to because of your geolocation data and your visits to USF. Well, this actually happened. This was a lawsuit that was filed just about 2 years ago in Northern California. I believe they ended up settling on this. But Facebook abused that software development kit, that access to the San Francisco website, to steal patient data, protected under HIPAA and everything. It's literally everyone. If you don't have a Facebook account or any Meta account, they're still surveilling you, and they know exactly who you are. So that should terrify everybody.
We have
There's go ahead.
We have a question from the audience, so let me read it. This is from Ron, who says, my background in part was history. Is there any aspect in history which would suggest a way to navigate the new technology or an aspect of the human communication revolution? And then he gives some examples like learning to make audio sounds to communicate with others, writing, the printing press and movable type, books and newspapers. Then we moved on to electronic communication, beginning with the telegraph, television, and now moving into the world of artificial intelligence. Simply put, is this just, another aspect to the communication revolution of human beings?
I don't think you can really place it on that timeline. This is really a unique moment in human history, specifically because it is essentially decentralizing access to intelligence. And that, sounds like a really grand philosophical question, but each one of those moments in history are achievable in theory by this technology, right? Whether it be the advent or execution of a task through the printing press, whether it be, the Industrial Revolution as a whole. All of those problems today could be solved by these systems in their earliest stage. And so when you consider where we are in this process, it's truly unlike anything we've ever encountered. I think really where we could look at this is maybe the Industrial Revolution in terms of like labor displacement, even like the introduction of the computer into some of these more traditionally blue-collar work environments and how it destabilized labor. I often think to the introduction of the computer to the cash register, right? So your grocery store employee who traditionally, is working on more of a, offline system to process your goods and take in the funds, suddenly now has to work a computer. And for the average employee who was working on that kind of assembly line, many of them just couldn't, do that. That was just not possible. They were never going to be able to learn how to use the computer, and they just like fell out of the labor force. And I think like that type of dynamic is something we can study. But when you consider the questions that we've never been able to answer about, our lives, whether it be unsolvable math equations, really like hard questions about how, curing cancer, these types of things. The ability for AI to do that, I think, dwarfs every other comparable leap we've made in history. Because like what happens when all of the unanswered questions are answered, right? Like this is kind of the territory we're entering into, and it is very fascinating, but there isn't a playbook here, I think is part of the problem.
Thanks.
Well, if there's no playbook, that means we don't know where we're going.
Yeah, I think, and as crazy as that sounds, I think that is kind of the case here. There is actually no end in sight. There isn't an obvious landing spot where this just like stabilizes, we're done. That doesn't exist. No one's actually painted that picture. There's a lot of, kind of fear-mongering of Edendian doomsday. There's a lot of kind of like optimism content suggesting it's like the Holy Land is at the end of this process. It's kind of impossible to say really where it goes. I think kind of the way I'm looking at this, I purely really touch on the government side of this, trying to figure out how we let this thing flourish without causing any damage. And for me, the playbook here that we're kind of building from the ground up is we want to essentially describe a desired outcome and not be overly demanding on how we get there, right? We want to let these companies build in the correct direction and not tell them necessarily how to do it. And I think that is really the direction we want to go. We say, we want this to unlock, all this potential for mankind. We want this to make the world a better place. These are kind of the things we're looking for. This is our criteria. go in that direction. And, these are the guardrails. If you veer off onto this path where, you maybe encroach on liberty or some of these other kind of fundamental concerns, we're going to stop that. But as long as you stay in the lane here and progress in the right direction, and, we're going to let you do your thing. And I think that is really how we unlock a positive outcome. I was just talking to some startup founders here on Capitol Hill today, and they were discussing how difficult it is, particularly for the companies operating in the national defense industry, innovative startups trying to bring AI to our national security conversation. They simply cannot operate. They run into compliance burdens and all these different things constantly, unless you have a congressman or someone in the White House, guiding you through this and making sure you make through all of these crazy, check-in points for really modest innovations. You're going to be sued into oblivion. And to me, that is the biggest risk, as I talked about earlier, is that our fear prevents us from reaching a much better world, a golden age, if you will, just is unfulfilled. And that to me is what we're working on, constructing that playbook.
There's an article that appeared, I believe, today in Barron's, by Julian DeRosa, where Martha Whitaker, who has do you know Martha?
I do not know.
She has a company that's trying to be involved in campaigns for privacy, and she rails against business insiders that really don't care about that. And she said that the AI technologies we're talking about today are reliant on mass surveillance. She said they require huge amounts of data that are the derivatives of this mass surveillance business model that grew out of the 90s in the US and has become the economic engine of the tech industry. She established the AI Now Institute in New York at New York University in 2017. How do you guard against the use of this information, and how do you make companies comply? For example, Congresswoman Rogers' bill says that if you run a particular company, that you only need to get from the customer that which you need for the purposes of the order, but invariably you'll get down to the line of credit, which you need.
Yes, yeah.
And that requires a social security number in many cases, or an ID number if you're different business entity. And so just getting that information, credit information on an individual, doesn't that involve a mass amount of information already?
Yeah, this is interesting, and it's something I encounter quite often in these conversations around, AI governance. But it fundamentally is not an AI problem. It's an absence of tech governance problem. These issues, this mass surveillance, these data collection practices that are very unsavory but legal, have been permitted for the better part of 2 decades. And that is objectively what has created this, foundation by which these models are scaling. These vast troves of data are fueling the AI surge. You don't get asked to consent to it, but you're without a doubt included in this, conversation, whether it be your, publication, if you've ever written an op-ed or published a paper, or, simply posted on social media. You've been included in this. That is not the AI company's fault. This is the data collector's fault. That data is out in the public domain, and the AI companies are training at it really without even really considering, where it came from, what it is. They're just collecting everything. And, that's horrifying, obviously, but they didn't actually take that data from you. Someone else did. And so Congresswoman Rogers' proposed legislation essentially cuts this off, right? The ability to mass collect data is now limited. And that will have a downstream effect on cleaning up these AI models, but there is absolutely no way to remove that data that they intruded on, years ago from the models now. It's lost forever. And that, it's terrible. I wish it wasn't that way. But we can only really fix the future. So going back and backfilling these unsolved tech problems is kind of the way to solve for a lot of these fear scenarios around AI and its intrusiveness.
I've read a story about an AI computer farm, and they're called info farms. And what it is that these are giant buildings where the computers work, but they do two things. They generate a tremendous amount of noise, a howling noise. And also that these AI computers and the farms are now the second largest user of electricity in the United States, only behind heating and cooling. That's staggering.
It is, yes, yeah. I'm currently, taking this call from Northern Virginia. Just about 20 or 30-minute drive from me is essentially what is the data center capital of the world. It is where a lot of these, buildings that you describe are located. You drive by them, it's very funny to look at. They're windowless monstrosities, concrete buildings that span, as far as the eye can see. And inside of them, you're right, they're sucking up a tremendous amount of energy. And we've barely even scratched the surface of what, the future's demand will be for this. The meanwhile, we're not scaling the grid. The grid really has not grown in terms of energy generation substantially since this phenomenon has occurred. And so, what we're looking out at, maybe some people say 2026, it might be a little later, who knows, this kind of computational revolution, this, data center boom, where we're seeing these things pop up everywhere, will actually exceed the amount of energy we can provide in the US, right? We just suddenly are sucking up so much energy that there's no energy left. What happens then? I actually don't think anyone has an answer. Do we stop them from building these centers? Do we let the centers just suck up as much as they'd like? It's tough to say, but this technology stops the minute the data centers stop, right? We are at a ceiling. The moment the centers can't, expand or add more power, it's over. We're baked in there. So training naturally requires more. Where are we going to get that power? Nuclear, maybe, maybe we have some sort of regulatory reform that allows for transmission lines to be built easier, and we can actually connect places that haven't previously had the privilege of being connected, solve some problems there. But one of the tougher questions, a bottleneck, certainly you could say, that we're rapidly hurling towards, this is essentially we're locked into that reality. There's no way for us to solve it before we hit there. So it's just a question of what do we do when we arrive.
Yeah, that kind of leads into another comment from the audience that goes back to the last question about about historical evolution of human communication. Question being then, how do we teach young people about the world they're going to live in if we don't know the direction we're going ourselves? And Ron points out that this is a new concept, which has really never been a problem. We've never had a problem like this in the past, although I kind of think that on some levels with this technology, we have kind of been here before, because a lot of technology, even, if we're looking at things like, the telephone or the car, right? At the time people were creating them, did anybody envision super highways, traffic jams, the Beltway, that kind of stuff? So I kind of think it maybe isn't as dissimilar. It's just that maybe the future potential for this and not knowing where we're going is maybe more frightening now because of this kind of technology. I mean, I'm sorry, I keep coming back to Judgment Day. I just, the day the computers decide that we as humans are the problem with the planet. I'm not sure if there is a question about how do we teach young people, but give it a shot.
Yeah, I think, there's been this temptation across academia to kind of isolate the classroom away from these tools, preserve the old way of teaching. And I think there's a lot of merit to that. But the best way to understand where we're headed is to actually use these things, become familiar with them, and start to see how they affect your life, your day-to-day life, right? And I think for many of us, it augments our life. It's not a replacement necessarily to your writing flows. The way I teach, students very often is to, generate your own text and maybe have this be a writing tutor. You put this in and it's coaching you. And like, those are the positive ways to use this technology. And when you're using it in that way, you can see a world, close your eyes and imagine 20 years in the future where it just helps you with things like this. Maybe you don't have to schedule a Zoom call like this. It just is ready for you in the inbox because it knows we talked. Like, I'm not opposed to that. I think like scheduling Zoom meetings, as you and I have discussed, is horrible. Like, it's a total pain. I shouldn't have to spend my day like figuring out if the calendar invite's going to work. Like, those are the life enhancing parts of this that I think really should be instilled on students, is that the tools are what we make of them. We shouldn't want an environment in which we restrict the functionality of these tools, because essentially we are giving the government, we are giving corporations free rein to decide what this stuff is actually allowed to help you with. And to me, that is crazy. The idea that like, maybe, we don't allow for AI assistance in a particular category because it could encroach on market share. There's all sorts of literature out there right now of how we're rapidly approaching a world in which you can have a no employee $1 million business, all through AI, just having everything automated. You should be allowed to do that. And I think like, this is where it gets interesting. There's conversations around universal basic income because of this great labor replacement. And I think kids and university professors in particular really fixate on this. I haven't seen anything that suggests this is even like near in the near future. It's a lot of just kind of fear-mongering propaganda. But I think that is really my prescription, is like, use the tools, have the kids experience this moment. Because, what a blessing it is to be a student going through a technological revolution with the resources of a university there to like support and navigate this journey with you. In theory, you're leaving the institution with a great toolkit, something that sets you apart from the market. Embrace it, really be a shepherd for them, teach them how to use it ethically and professionally, and they'll be better off. And who knows what the future looks like, but hopefully they're better for it.
So we have
Catherine,
somebody asked if you talk or discuss these questions with professional futurists.
Well, I have the privilege of, speaking with small startup founders across the country. One of my real passions and why I joined Heritage was taking on big tech in favor of little tech. I like these 2 to 3 person companies that have a grand vision for what our country should look like, whether it's revolutionizing healthcare, transportation, and helping them really like navigate the regulatory environment and being an advocate for them in Washington, something I love. And I find that they are the greatest, futurists. They're the ones with the grandest ideas. They're not sitting behind the desk, pondering these grand questions. They're in the field tinkering and trying to get us there. And I think in that domain in particular, they have very unique insights. And so I think it's actually very accessible to talk to these, futurists. Find your local small business founder and hear what they're working or like building towards. And I think you'll be encouraged. We get a lot of bad news coverage, blasted at us every day, but around the country, there's these like 2 to 3 person teams that are fighting as hard as they possibly can. I was just with about 3 of them this morning. And it's really encouraging. And so take in that content, optimistic, futurist content, and I think you'll be a little bit happier headspace about this tech.
Yeah. Thanks.
Catherine, you have students write essays.
Yes.
Do you know if some of those are AI generated, or what do you do?
Well, um, I have not yet found a very successful way to identify AI generated stuff in the way that you could identify plagiarized material before. But the one thing I can tell is when somebody has taken something that they probably wrote originally and ran it through an AI generated, like a Grammarly or something that fixes all their grammar and their comma splices and their misspellings and their typos and all that kind of stuff. That I can tell.
So what I often, talk to professors about, some of my past professors, is for trying to preserve the integrity of like the original writing, make
Yeah.
them write it in class, hand
Yeah.
again, pen and paper again, and it
Yeah.
sucks, but it's part of the process, and
Yeah.
then assign them writing tasks with the purpose of using the AI tool, and try and get them to make the best, most impressive product possible with the AI tool,
Yeah.
and like those are two different assignments. In the workforce, I have my interns, draft memos with the help of AI, but then I also have them write analytical arguments during meetings and slide them over to me. And I can see their live thinking. This is like the augmentation of intelligence that I think is like important to really train. Yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents on the idea.
Yeah, I came to the conclusion that this is not something that education is going to be able to fight against. It's going to be figuring out how to get people to use it in a way that they can, that they're still developing skills, because you don't want the computer, you don't want the AI to replace their brain, but where it can augment what they do, that's a use, or that's a reasonable use of it. So, but not everybody agrees with that.
At,
Yes,
at
yeah.
the beginning, at the beginning of our program, Jake, you said that one of the problems that you have with AI is that it does not allow an individual to reach his or her capacity, intellectual capacity. And Catherine, I know you picked that up. And that, of course, runs counter to the educational process, which is to teach students how to expand their mind and horizon and to be able to achieve maximum, or at least achieve the best use of what they have.
Yeah.
This is scary. What you're saying is that a machine thinks for you, and you don't have to think as much. You could,
Well, you have to think differently. You still have to think. I mean, presumably you still have to think. You have to come up with basic ideas, but that kind of messy detail of grammar and punctuation, yeah, who needs to worry about that? Because you can have a computer fix that part. So I mean, it's different kind of thinking, and that's what I'm trying to get, my mind around.
Yeah, I think, in a perfect world, this makes your workflow easier. You're doing all of the thinking. I'm a notoriously bad note taker, right? It makes no sense if I write it myself. I can read it. I know exactly what it means, but I hand it to my boss or a colleague and they'd be like, what am I looking at? I can drop this into one of the AI tools and instantaneously have it translated to be able to send to a colleague where it's actually, written in prose and it makes sense. The AI can just like right away pick up on it. And for me, that's a huge benefit to my day to day because I'm no longer spending an hour translating, my internal thoughts into something that my colleague will be able to read. I just gained an hour back. And I think this is where it's beneficial. And then you're right in the sense of like the student, I think uniquely could become susceptible to relying on this for its thinking. And I think that's where this gets complicated, and why I think professors and even teachers at a younger stage should teach with this. I think they need to explain how to use it because the bad use case of depending on it, impossible to unwind, right? Once you embark on that path, it's over. So start them out, teach them the right ways to use this, and they'll be better for it. Let them do it themselves, and they'll, bury themselves, I think, quite quickly.
Yeah, good point.
We're getting towards the end of our program. Catherine, could you share with the listeners, especially those who signed in late, how they can listen to this program in its entirety?
Well, if you registered for it originally, you can, if you registered through the Alumni Learning Network, then you will get an email that will send you a link to this, a recording of this. If you did not pre-register, you might have to communicate directly to myself or Don, and we could send you a link to the recording.
Okay.
Yeah.
My email is, it's my name, DONMANZULLO @yahoo.com.
And,
So you
and
could,
my, yeah,
go
and mine is CFORSLUND @rockford.edu.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, Jake, did you have any final questions or thoughts, Catherine?
Well, there was one other comment from the audience about what would happen to the writings of Shakespeare or the music of Mozart. And I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that. You mean if Shakespeare did his writing, but then put it through AI, would it have been different? I'm not sure. So I'll let Jake respond because I think he might have a better idea.
Yeah, this is a fun one. I think really the question here is like, would Shakespeare have written what Shakespeare wrote had there been AI? Would we have gotten that product? And, these AI models are only as good, their outputs, that is, as the data that we input, right? So at the time, hypothetically, there probably weren't as many great works for Shakespeare to potentially generate. And if Shakespeare was reliant on these tools, Shakespeare never would have reached that level of, written composition using that. I think a fun topic I tell my interns in particular to explore is the concept of hauntology. And it's this idea essentially of like cultural capture due to an overdependence on technology. This idea that we become stagnant due to a reliance on computers in particular for like creative expression. So the best example of this would be how, pretty much every decade through, human history up until the advent of the computer, there was a new instrument or a new sound added into music. And there was a distinct moment, the 70s have a distinct sound. You tune through Sirius XM radio and it's like 70s, 80s, 90s, and then like hits. And what happened there? Well, it's the introduction of the computer. And because you were able to have every instrument at your disposal during the composition phase, there was no need now to make new sounds, right? Like you could just merge things together, and it's kind of this like culmination of generations of music. And it's true across the board, because what happens as AI becomes popular is the input data starts to become increasingly artificial, right? Because less original works are going into these models and more artificial content that actually the beginning point was from the model itself, and then it comes back around and goes back in. Suddenly the model knows no new expression. And so when does that happen? Tough to say, but if we continue on this path, maybe, towards the end of 2030, there's minimal original human work being trained into these models. And does artistic expression just die? So I'd encourage you to read on that. That's assigned reading I usually give to students and to interns. Mark Fisher is a philosopher who wrote on this. And this is kind of like one of those newer philosophical conversations. So much of it takes place over blogs. So don't feel like you're in a weird spot reading some blog post on this, because that's kind of where we're at in terms of the modern philosophical stuff, but a fun one to kind of grapple with. I don't have a great solution for it.
Yeah, well, I hope we come up with one before 2030.
Jake, do you put out a newsletter or blog or something to which people can subscribe?
No newsletter at the moment. I have a collection of writings on AI that you can find at the Heritage Foundation's website. So you just go to heritage.org and you can type in my name, Jake Denton, or simply go to the technology tab. And I have about 3 pieces out right now, one on China, one on competition, and one on the EU landscape. I have a piece coming out probably sometime next week on the state of essentially regulation at the state level here in the US. And that's kind of where I keep my commentary is, a once a month piece that drops in. But you can also follow me on Twitter, Real J Denton. I try and chime in or at least amplify the interesting stories that I stumble across in this space.
Well, thank you for your the time that you've given us. I say thank you with a question mark, not you personally, but the information that is absolutely overwhelming. And we'll have other programs on this, and we want to thank you for the time that you've taken in order to accommodate us on this program.
Absolutely. It was a
Catherine?
pleasure.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
We'll talk to you later, Jay. Thank you.
All right. Have a good one.
Yeah.